This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
The latest from Africa's battle with coronavirus as confirmed cases pass 665,000. China sends a team of experts to Xinjiang to help deal with a new cluster of coronavirus infections. And Turkey slams Egypt for actions in Libya. What does Egypt's entry into the conflict really mean? Hello, welcome to Africa Live. As always, great to have you with us. I'm Richard Nta, live in Nairobi. And for those of you joining us from across the continent and around the globe, we thank you for joining us. Let's take a look at other stories making headlines this hour. The World Bank calls on Uganda to scrap its social media tax. And in sports, South African Football League resumption delayed further despite delicate planning. Once again, welcome to Africa Live. We begin with the COVID-19 pandemic in Africa, where infections have been increasing daily since the first reported case in February 2020. Data from the Africa Centers for Disease Control and Prevention shows that Africa has more than 660,000 cases of the coronavirus. The continent has recorded at least 14,000 deaths and more than 340,000 recoveries. The South African government has started digging thousands of graves for an anticipated increase in COVID-19 related deaths. South Africa accounts for about half of the infections in Africa. There is increasing pressure on government to beef up public health facilities as many countries ease their lockdowns. And now to the latest on the coronavirus in China. The Chinese mainland reported 16 domestic cases on Friday, all in Xinjiang region in northwestern China. Its capital city, Urumqi, has tightened entry and exit measures with most flights canceled. Meanwhile, 6 imported cases were also reported Friday, and Beijing has reported no new cases for 12 consecutive days. A medical team has been dispatched to Xinjiang after the latest cluster of new infections was confirmed. The team includes 21 medics from various hospitals in Wuhan who are specialized in testing. They will help conduct coronavirus tests in the region's capital, Urumqi. The National Health Commission also sent a team of experts who will further investigate the outbreak and the scale of the new infections. Well, the coronavirus outbreak has killed nearly 140,000 people in the U.S. The number of confirmed cases and deaths keeps going up every day, and people are already creating online memorials for the victims. Jills Gibson has more.
These are the faces behind the numbers. Just a handful of America's nearly 140,000 COVID-19 victims. On the Morning America website, family and friends can post a picture and description of their loved one. Its founders believe we're losing sight of the human cost of the pandemic as the numbers spiral higher and higher.
Trying to find a way for people to be able to build a community around their own family member and around the page that's created for their family member, but also a sense that they're not alone in the greater community out there, that there are other people feeling that pain. And it's not going to change or eliminate that pain, but maybe help them understand and help them feel that they're not alone. And so those were the motivations behind creating it.
The website is one of several projects set up to start remembering the victims of COVID-19 in the US. The National Mall here in Washington is mostly made up of monuments to the founding fathers and conflicts. The names of almost 60,000 Americans who were killed in the Vietnam War are inscribed here. But when it comes to victims of disease, it's different. As the AIDS epidemic raged in the 1980s, it wasn't the government, but activists who created the AIDS Memorial Quilt, a 48,000-panel fabric shrine. One of its founders says the coronavirus pandemic feels very similar to the early days of AIDS.
We're now in the middle of a crisis where, once again, people are dying unseen and alone. And because of that, the country isn't realizing the enormity of this epidemic because they're not seeing people in hospitals and they're not seeing people die. And something has to be done to rally the country in a different way. It's clearly not working on a political level.
So far, about 150 people have been memorialized on the Morning America website. Scroll past the photographs and you'll find tens of thousands of anonymous red dots. The founders want to put a name and a face to every single one, all of America's nearly 140,000 coronavirus victims. Giles Gibson for CGTN, Washington.
Brazil's health ministry reported over 34,000 new coronavirus cases on Friday, but the World Health Organization says the rise is no longer exponential. It has plateaued. Our correspondent Paulo Cabral reports from Sao Paulo.
Brazil is certainly still one of the epicenters of the pandemic in the world, but for the last few days, actually, the number is not increasing as it did before. So it's what they call a plateau. However, a plateau in a very high figure, still between 39,000, 40,000, 45,000 new cases a day here in Brazil. And also it must be said that this varies widely across the different regions of the country. And actually still in a number of big cities in Brazil, in a number of cities with more than 100,000 inhabitants, the infection is still accelerating. However, there are good news coming from some places that were dramatic not long ago. For example, the city of Manaus in the Brazilian Amazon, where the healthcare system practically collapsed, now sees a reduction of cases, even though there is already a opening in very advanced stages. Also, in the city of São Paulo, the number of deaths has been reduced for the last 3 weeks consistently. Also, the number of cases seems to be reaching the same kind of plateau. So there is already this bit of good news, but still it's not clear at all if the infection has reached its peak in Brazil, if it's just in a plateau right now and will go back to increase, or if it's now it will go downward. It's so much doubt that actually local authorities in São Paulo have cancelled the main New Year celebration in the city, which happens in Avenida Paulista. The mayor acknowledged there's still a few months to go until there, but he said that this would need much planning, so they could not decide later. So now New Year celebration in São Paulo has been cancelled today, despite the good news when it comes to the fact that there is a plateau now in Brazil.
Turkish President Tayyip Erdogan has denounced Egypt and the United Arab Emirates for supporting forces based in eastern Libya. This comes after leaders of Libyan tribes affiliated to General Khalifa Haftar gave their permission to Egypt's president and army to intervene in the conflict. President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi has answered the call by vowing to protect Libya's sovereignty should it be threatened. Now, Libya's east-based lawmakers have also urged for Egypt's direct military support. All right, for more on this, we have Dr. Nabil Negim El-Din, an independent researcher and author on international politics. He is joining us live from Cairo. Doctor, thank you for joining us here on Africa Live. Let's get straight into it. How influential are the tribal leaders who asked Egypt to intervene to help Haftar in Libya? Doctor.
Yes, thanks for having me. I would like to start by saying that the situation in Libya is highly fragmental, and the Libyan political arena is full of different military and political powers. Egypt was totally patient towards the situation in Libya, but it has realized that the GNA, the Government of National Accord, is going to escalate its military actions against the eastern part of the country. So, according to that, President Sisi of Egypt has disclosed his sort of warning that the line of Sirte, the coastal city in the north, and Jufra, the military air base, is a red line to deter the GNA and who is behind it of exceeding that line. Then Egyptian administration has invited the heads of tribes to Egypt in a move to raise and mobilize people's support toward its vision to find a peaceful solution to the situation in Libya.
All right, Dr. Nebel Negim Eldin, talk to us about what Egypt's interest really is in the Libyan conflict.
As you know, that there is a sort of more than 1,000 kilometers western border between Libya and Egypt. And Egypt is considering the situation in Libya as a national security file. So the Egyptian strategy in that file is not to intervene militarily, but Egypt is keeping its right to protect its national security if there is a sort of danger coming through the western border of Egypt, which is the Libyan desert.
All right, Dr. Nabil Negim Eldin, my final question to you. Let's talk action, reaction, consequences. What will the other outside players like Turkey, the UAE, Russia, respond if Egypt enters the war? How will they respond?
You are very much aware that launching a war is not an easy decision, because when you start a war, you have to have a quite clear vision about the repercussions. The forces who are supporting the GNA, Turkey, France, and maybe Turkey, Russia, and Italy, would not be in a situation to get involved in a widespread military conflict southern of the Mediterranean. And I would like to draw your attention to the Washington warning last week, when it said that if people are seriously interested to restore peace in Libya, they have to control the shipments of arms to the government in Tripoli, as well as the Libyan National Army in the east. I would like to tell you very simply, war in Libya is not an easy game. About 6 or 7 different countries from Europe, from Africa and Asia are going to be directly involved and directly injured by a military action in Libya.
All right, Dr. Nebel Negim Eldin, thank you so much for your insight and analysis. Let's leave it there for now. Let's turn our attention now to the United States, where John Lewis, a leader of the civil rights movement in the U.S., has died at the age of 80. He had been diagnosed with advanced pancreatic cancer last December. The African-American icon spent his life fighting against discrimination and racial injustice. He marched with Martin Luther King and was the last survivor of the Big Six civil rights activists who were instrumental in the organization of the March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom in 1963. Lewis was best known for leading the 1965 protest demanding voting rights for Black Americans. He won his seat in Congress in 1986. Well, more rain is expected to batter central and southern parts of China through Sunday. The national forecaster has issued a rainstorm warning on Chongqing and the provinces of Shandong and Jiangsu, Anhui, Hubei, and Guizhou, and Hunan. Data from the Ministry of Water Resources show 127 rivers have surpassed flood warning levels, and 3 rivers have exceeded their record peak. The second worst flood of the year has formed at the upper reaches of the Yangtze River. The emergency response level has been increased in affected regions. Yang Xiangxi reports from Suzhou.
I am now by the Taihu Lake, which is the third biggest freshwater lake in China. It covers an area of 2,400 square kilometers. And since May, it's been raining some 70% more here in this region than previous years. And that has created some immense stress for the rivers and dams in this region. It raises a lot of concern because this massive lake lays across the eastern provinces of Jiangsu and Zhejiang and is connected to the estuaries in Shanghai. Now, these are all very densely populated and industrially advanced regions in China. Now, behind me is the Taipuzha floodgate. It is responsible for some 60% of the water discharge of the Taihu Lake. And you can see that all 9 floodgates have now opened. They're running on full capacity, and they're letting through some 630 square meters of water per second. Now, if you look at the water level here, it is pretty high. It's been above the warning mark for 20 days in a row. It is now 5 centimeters above the highest red line. So China's Ministry of Water Resources issued a first level warning for this region, as you said. And on another note, a red alert has been also issued for Nanjing City, which is also a very economically important city in Jiangsu province along the Yangtze River. Now, in the lower reaches in Shanghai, officials are saying that the water levels there still remain pretty smooth and below warning level. Now, this month, these regions and these cities have been coordinating their flood discharge. Now, it is forecasted that there's still going to be some rain in the next week. So, although the water level here has still yet to reach its historical highs, but as rain is going to continue in the next few days, this will surely bring substantial challenge to the locals, which is bracing for the impacts.
And the news continues on Africa Live. Here's a look at what's ahead. Uganda stepping up interventions to prevent increase in malaria deaths. And the story of a South African petrol station attendant turned trainee doctor inspires many on social media.
Culture, the thread that holds Africa together. Every corner of the continent has its own story. From the colorful threads in Morocco to the fairy dances of Botswana. But with great strides in technology, this very culture is struggling to stay pure. CGTN Africa brings you a brand new series, a deep dive into some of Africa's most unique communities and their race to survive in the 21st century. Join us as we take an intimate look at Africa's tribes in a flux.
I remember my son, I can't remember how old he was, but one day he said, "Mommy, tell them you're sorry."
She was a feisty young woman who might say the bold and the beautiful. She was not afraid.
But Unity now, also as a judge, was a very progressive judge.
My legacy is to challenge myself.
Nigeria is my home. 160 million vibrant, ambitious individuals constantly seeking the perfect self-expression. It is these people who inspired me to be that person that is seen, to be a voice that is heard, and ultimately to be the anchor that I am. I have to tap in, tune in, and turn on the very best qualities within me to deliver the news. I'm Richard Nta, an anchor for CGTN. Welcome back to Africa Live. Thanks for staying with us. Uganda is stepping up interventions to prevent increased cases of illness and death from malaria. The country has one of the highest numbers of annual fatalities from malaria in Africa, but it had scaled back health prevention activities due to the COVID-19 pandemic. Leon Sayenga reports from Kampala.
Malaria kills between 70 and 100,000 people in Uganda each year, according to the Ministry of Health. The majority are pregnant mothers and children. Clinically diagnosed malaria accounts for close to 50% of outpatient visits at health facilities. Since March this year, COVID-19 has caused substantial disruptions to access of medical services. And according to the Lancet Global Health July 2020 report, deaths due to malaria in low-income and middle-income countries could rise by over 30% over 5 years. Uganda suspended its mosquito net distribution in April due to the lockdown imposed to curb the spread of the coronavirus. But with government now easing on the restrictions, the Ministry of Health says it can resume interventions in the malaria-burdened areas. In a renewed campaign, 27 million mosquito nets will be distributed within 25 districts in the north and eastern parts of Uganda.
The idea is to have all Ugandans under nets. But not only that, the idea is every 3 years you need to replace the nets because that is their lifespan. 3 years, the fabric will have been torn and the chemical will have worn out from repeated washes.
According to the 2018-19 Malaria Indicator Survey, Uganda has made progress in its fight against malaria. The disease prevalence rate has dropped from 19 to 9% in 5 years.
We have to do the same things we were doing before. We have to make sure that there is a good distribution of bed nets, that we treat people early, residual spraying continues, larvicidals has to continue as well, but we have to do it differently.
And Uganda is vowing to make progress.
As a country, we are prepared to really solve the issue of malaria and any other epidemic, not really COVID notwithstanding. We are there for you.
With development partners like the US, United Kingdom and Global Fund, the government is also reaching out for funding to increase research on the best ways to eradicate malaria. Leon Sanyanga, CGTN, Kampala, Uganda.
Quite often, stories coming out of Africa about the youth paint a picture of hopelessness brought about by high unemployment and crime, among other issues. However, there are tales of remarkable success amidst challenges. In South Africa, the story of a petrol station attendant turned trainee doctor has inspired many on social media. CGTN's Yulisa Njamela has the rest of this incredible story.
Ntando Makhubela is a young man from Mpumalanga province here in South Africa. After finishing his high school education with distinctions, Makhubela was excited about pursuing his dreams of becoming a doctor. But his enthusiasm was short-lived. Despite his excellent exam results, he was unable to join a university because of financial constraints. The young man then decided to look for a job as he knew he could not continue depending on his parents. He found a job at a garage where he worked as a petrol pump attendant. Makhubela had no idea that his job would open doors for him to pursue his dream.
Yeah, after my matric, after receiving my results, well, I was excited. My family was happy. So now the problem was getting into med school because I've always wanted to get into med school. And then we had a function at our school to celebrate those students who did well. And yeah, I was recognized by many there. So after that, I couldn't get into vets. And then when I came back home, one of the people who were there, an ANC Youth League member, saw me at my workplace at Engine Garage, and he was so disappointed to see me there because he knew I did very well at school.
The ANC Youth League is the governing ANC party's youth structure. Once Makhubela explained his problem, the Youth League member assisted him to attain a scholarship via the South Africa Tuber Medical Program. That's when his journey to being a medical doctor began. Once in Cuba, during his first year, the determined student had to learn Spanish.
Like here in Cuba, you can only converse in Spanish. Everyone speaks Spanish here, so if you don't know Spanish, then you're doomed. You cannot communicate with the people. Even at the hospital, you have to communicate with the patients in Spanish, and you have to get all the information in Spanish.
After he completes his 5th year in July 2021, Makubela will be returning home to complete his final year at a university where he will graduate. The young man says when he completes his studies, he will return home and contribute to his community in Mpumalanga province and perhaps also continue to inspire others.
My plan is go back to my community and promote primary health care amongst the people. That what the Cuban healthcare system teaches a lot.
The South Africa-Cuba medical program was introduced in 1998. It has since assisted a large number of young South Africans. Yulisa Njambela for CGTN in Johannesburg, South Africa.
Police in Kenya have raised alarm over the increasing number of crimes involving teenagers across the country. CGTN's Nick Mondima visited Kibera, one of the biggest informal settlements in the region. The slum is listed among the crime hotspots identified by law enforcers.
Increased crime in different parts of Kenya has become a matter of grave concern for authorities. Police are worried by the increasing number of youth involved in crime, especially in major cities and towns.
During the curfew and since the closure of schools, where we have children who are idle at home, parents are not very keen on what their children are doing. I've noted twice or thrice where we have arrested small children, primary school children, robbing people of mobiles, and they go to sell to others.
We visit Kibera slums, one of the largest in Africa, identified as a hotspot where crimes involving teenagers have been reported. The schools have currently closed, and in our walk deep in the slum early in the morning, we meet several teenagers. Their friends and most take part in sporting activities, but with schools and training venues closed, they're largely idle. This is the chill spot, as they call it, where they relax as they ponder the next move.
So many youth are idle and don't have jobs. They view stealing and mugging as their easier option. That's where they can get their daily bread. They don't have a choice. Also, many of them are not well educated.
At the end of the day, you know, when you're idle and you're desperate, then there's little else to look up to, you know. So I think that it's a normal thing that when someone is backed up to the end of the wall, they will have to do something to push back. And I think that's the result of what we are seeing in a lot of young people.
Accusing fingers are now being pointed at parents who, due to the current global pandemic, have to spend more time with their children. Many parents, however, think that guiding the young ones should be a collective social responsibility.
We are all together into this, because I remember a long time when we were still young, children were a responsibility of the whole community. But nowadays, it's like children are being left maybe for the teachers, or they are left for the parents, or they are left on their own.
Schools and educational facilities have also been put on the spot over their failure to inculcate moral values.
They should teach a few things of responsibility, like you can't steal from your community. At the end of the day, these are still your brothers and sisters.
With nearly 1 in 5 Kenyan youth unemployed, according to the World Bank, increasing cases of carjacking, burglary and robbery with violence are being reported across Nairobi and its slums.
We are not living amongst the angels. We are living amongst people who want money because they are hungry and they want to fend for themselves. And others see the best way to act for themselves is to go and pick what you have.
We should just go back to those olden days where a child's behavior was being shaped by the whole community.
It's clear responsibilities now are two-way traffic, parents and teachers. Schools are closed right now because of COVID-19, and many of the young people are taking responsibility into their hands. The crime rates, the numbers are actually mind-boggling. So the issue is the government to come in and, of course, support the young people who say they've been forgotten. Nick Mudimba, CGTN, Nairobi. Kenya.
The UN Food and Agriculture Organization warns that the desert locust infestation remains a big challenge in the Eastern African region. The COVID-19 pandemic has made it tough for effective control of the pest. The FAO says it has received 80% of an international appeal for more than $230 million. It has been forced to re-strategize how to continue operations. The infestation, combined with the pandemic, means that the region is facing increasing food insecurity. CGTN's Coletta Wanjohi spoke to David Chimimba Piri, the Eastern Africa Sub-Regional Coordinator for the FAO. He started by explaining why Eastern Africa is the most affected on the continent by hunger.
It is not a good situation. And the main reasons for the continuing chronic food insecurities are that we have first many droughts, that frequent droughts that then sometimes alternate with floods, as we have now. And then we also have many transboundary pests and diseases, fall armyworm, for example, a Rift Valley fever, trypanosomiasis, among many other plant and animal pests and diseases. And then this is also a region, East Africa is also a region where we have a lot of civil unrest and conflicts there that prevent people from doing agriculture, or in fact running away from certain situations, which means that they're not able to concentrate on agriculture themselves, and they get deprived of their livelihoods.
While we're still grappling with the COVID-19 pandemic that is being blamed for contributing to food insecurity, we still have the desert locust infestation.
It is a tough situation because while we received about 90% of the resources, okay, way back in April, okay, when our appeal was actually smaller, we were not able to get all the supplies that we needed to help control the locusts. Because of course there were restrictions on travel, there were restrictions on borders, and so on. And it was also very difficult in general for the people who are actually making control to actually travel to the areas where we had the locusts. Okay, we have made some progress. We have done some 1 million, I think, hectares that have been surveyed across the sub-region. And we have managed to treat about 600,000 hectares out of this. In Kenya alone, I think we have managed now to treat out of the 38 counties that were affected by desert locust. Now we are remaining with 2, Marsabit and Turkana. But the numbers there are still quite large. We still have a big problem in Ethiopia as it is. We have a big problem in Somalia. We have some problems still in Uganda. At least for South Sudan, we now know what the problem is.
How easy or how tough is it for you and other agencies to balance between fighting the COVID-19 pandemic while at the same time trying to stem out the issue of desert locust infestation?
The control measures have been very difficult because for many countries here do not produce pesticides, or even those that produce pesticides, they need ingredients for those pesticides that we use for controlling desert locusts. Unfortunately, most of our suppliers for this, either the pesticides or the ingredients for making the pesticides, were China, Japan, Korea, and these we could not get those inputs at that particular time. We also had really big constraints getting the aircraft that we needed due to COVID. Now, I think we have developed a system where we can get the pesticides at the right time in all the countries, and also the aircraft that we need, working very closely with the Desert Locust Control Organization of East Africa.
Well, here's a look at some of our top headlines at this hour. Data from the Africa Centers for Disease Control and Prevention shows that Africa has more than 660,000 cases of the coronavirus. The continent has recorded at least 14,000 deaths and more than 340,000 recoveries. The Chinese mainland reported 16 domestic cases on Friday, all in Xinjiang region in the northwestern China. Its capital city, Urumqi, has tightened entry and exit measures with most flights canceled. And John Lewis, a leader of the civil rights movement in the U.S., has died at the age of 80. He was been diagnosed with advanced pancreatic cancer last December. The African-American icon spent his life fighting against discrimination and racial injustice. And those are some of the top stories at this hour. You are watching Africa Live. Here's a look at some of the top stories coming ahead. Stay tuned. Uganda. The World Bank calls on Uganda to scrap its social media tax. Nominees for World Trade Organization Director General position continues appearing before the Governing Council.
Africa is the nexus of enterprise, and global business will tell you why it matters.
From the mega investment projects to multi-billion-dollar mergers and acquisitions.
Africa today collects, just in terms of revenues from taxes alone, $545 billion a year. If you take 10% of that and you devote it to the energy sector, problem solved.
All this on Global Business, weekdays at this time on CGTN.
You don't find the stories of North Africa by sitting on the sidelines. You've got to get out, go there, and you'll find them. In the bazaars of Casablanca. Among the crowds in Cairo.
Who come to visit Cairo, the ancient capital of Egypt.
Along the waters of the Nile. Along the sands of the Sahara. No one else will take you where we can in North Africa. No one else will show you what it's all about. CGTN, see the difference.
Welcome back to Africa Live. Thanks for tuning in. The World Bank has asked Uganda to scrap its social media tax, arguing it's difficult to collect and easy to bypass. The East African nation imposed the tax in 2018 to curb online abuse and raise income for the government. The tax has instead reduced the proportion of internet users and widened digital and income inequality. CGTN's Isabel Nkuria with more details from Kampala.
Ugandan traders are throwing away produce that's going bad because they can't sell all of it on time. Campaigners say online marketing could have helped the vendors sell their produce much faster. But due to a social media tax, they would need to pay 5 cents every day to access online networks. They say that's too costly for their business.
COVID-19 has taught us that it is really imperative that we find a way to be able to communicate, to be able to move products, and this is really a crucial aspect that can be used. Whether you are a simple farmer with pineapples in central Uganda, you need to be able to send a WhatsApp message to the dealer to say, okay, now I have the pineapples, please come and pick them up.
The World Bank argues the tax is reducing the proportion of internet users and widening digital inequality. A report by e-commerce retail group Jumia found that last year there was a 15% drop in internet users after the introduction of the social media tax. There is also concern that the tax is curtailing innovation.
We are really reaching that point where a young individual in Uganda who is very creative, who is very smart, has no access to either information, but at the same time cannot explore their mind and be able to leverage all the available tools that are available on the internet and on social media.
President Yoweri Museveni said the tax would help stop online gossip and raise revenue for the government. But only 17% of the tax revenue collection was achieved in the financial year ending 2019. Opposition politicians in Uganda say Mr. Museveni's intention was to silence his critics.
That's the mistake that Mr. Museveni did. He thought that by introducing the tax, there would be fewer people because it's expensive to access social media. But Ugandans are desirous for change. They're hungry for change. So those that are able to pay, they will pay. They'll do everything they can because that's the platform that they have to air out their views.
The government has ignored requests from rights groups to suspend the tax during the coronavirus pandemic. The World Bank says the tax undermines efforts to promote public health and safety campaigns to reach a wider audience.
Uganda's finance ministry says the tax is going nowhere. However, the government is reviewing the matter and will come out with recommendations on how best it will implement the tax in future. Isabel Nakiria, CGTN Kampala, Uganda.
Kenya's candidate to lead the World Trade Organization, Amina Mohammed, says the body is in dire need of reform. This comes after nominations from 8 countries were submitted to replace Roberto Azevedo, who steps down on August the 31st. The successor is expected to steer reforms and negotiations in the face of rising protectionism, a deep recession caused by the COVID-19 pandemic, and growing trade tensions. The nominations include 3 African candidates: Hamid Mamdouh from Egypt, Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala from Nigeria, and Amina Mohammed from Kenya. This phase of the race starts with up to 2 months of campaigning, followed by a final decision by consensus. The campaign is set to end on September the 7th.
This vital system is being tested as never before. The WTO was already in difficulties before COVID-19 struck. Its negotiating function had faltered, with only limited successes in the last 25 years, despite the launch of the Doha round of negotiations at the beginning of the century. Trade tensions have increased, and the dispute settlement system has been compromised. There is widespread acknowledgement among WTO members that the WTO is in urgent need of reform.
Egypt has released its largest budget in history to deal with the uncertainty imposed by the coronavirus pandemic. The government says the $138 billion budget is aimed at stimulating the economy by increasing public investments in key economic sectors. Here is CGTN's Yasser Hakim with more details.
The 2020-2021 state budget is double last year's budget. What makes it unique is that it boosted expenditure on public investments. For example, health, education, and housing increased by 70%, agriculture by 245%, and IT and communications by 300%. The Deputy Minister of Planning tells CGTN the aim is to stimulate the economy.
Our vision is that we encourage investments to help push economic growth. These investments create job opportunities and confidence in the economy. Most countries in the region have reduced expenditure on public investments in their budgets. We are doing the opposite. Instead of a policy of contraction, we are increasing public investments by over 47%.
The North African nation's budget sees a rise in salaries and pensions for citizens to be able to sustain the effects of the coronavirus. There's also an initiative to encourage spending and consumption.
The initiative is based on establishing a fund to subsidize low-interest loans for any products the citizens want to purchase except food. This is meant to increase consumption and expenditure in the market.
The initiative begins in 3 months.
One of the main aspects that stimulate the economy is consumption and expenditure by citizens. This will encourage shops to reopen, industries to operate again and create badly needed revenue, as well as increase local production and export rather than importing goods.
The government says these measures will push economic growth to 3 and 4% and avoid the slowdown that has hit most countries in the region because of a pandemic. Yasser Hakim, CGTN, Cairo.
And we're not done just yet. The news continues on Africa Live. Here's a look at what's ahead. An online dating app booms as restaurants remain closed and lovers stay at home in Nigeria.
The greatest journeys, the greatest sights, the greatest adventures.
Here in Kanata, this weir allows the locals to walk on water.
We're far more than just TV news. We're your passport to the wonders of Africa.
To bring you stories of struggle, survival and hope.
So let's explore. CGTN. See the difference.
Welcome back. A Nigerian online dating company, Vibe, says the number of people signing up for its service each month has risen by 20% since the coronavirus outbreak. The spike in subscription inspired the organizers of a speed dating service to launch an online service, Dating in Quarantine, which matches people on anonymous phone call dates. CGTN's Beryl Ororo has that story.
Bars and restaurants in Lagos are shut, and Nigerians struggle to go out and socialize, and grooming standards have dropped. But for some, this is the perfect time to find a soulmate.
The dating thing, like during this restriction, it works perfectly for me because I'm really an indoors person. I'm not the type of person that would go out and stay out. Like, I like coming back home. I like my bed. I like my house. I'm safe, I'm comfortable here.
Sparked by the coronavirus, Akinao and others like him are driving a boom in online dating tailored for Nigerian professionals in what is described as the new normal.
Coronavirus has weirdly been good for us because I think a lot of more people, like because of the restrictions about going around and how they can interact with people, like they've turned online for solutions. So we've had like a lot of growth. We've had like a 30% growth in user registration on the app.
Vibe, which went live in April 2019, has seen user numbers grow to roughly 8,000 as movement restrictions push people to seek intimacy online.
Lounges are closed. People can't meet for first dates unless they meet at people's homes and locations, which people didn't feel was really safe. So we decided to do something that had to do with online dating so people could meet and have first dates online.
It removes all those visual stimulants. So like you're no longer really focused on what the person looks like, but you're focusing on the questions, on the answers to the questions that you're hearing from the person. So it feels more personal than before.
Vibe organizes game nights and speed dating sessions online, allowing subscribers and clients to meet and connect with potential forever soulmates in unprecedented times. Beryl Oro, CGTN.
All right, guess what? We've got your sports news coming up after the break. Don't go away. Here's a peek at the headline. In sports, South African Football League resumption delayed further despite